I'm Rob Skinner, and this is the Rob Skinner Podcast. Today on episode 109, I talked to Shannon Van Zee. I had coffee with Shannon while on my coast-to-coast for climb cross-country motorcycle ride. He and his wife Janella live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. They planted a church on their own, and from 2 disciples, it's grown to a group of 20. Shannon shares about how he fought off leukemia, what motivated him to start a church in Sioux Falls with only his wife and daughter. He shares about the highs and the lows of self-supporting ministry and what it takes to plant a church while working full-time in a more remote area. All this and more on the Rob Skinner Podcast. Welcome back to the Rob Skinner Podcast. My goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, to make this life count, and to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. I'm thrilled today to have Shannon Van Zee on the program. Shannon is a self-supporting minister in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And recently on my motorcycle ride cross-country, I had coffee with Shannon and talked to him about his work in starting a church there in Sioux Falls and the good things that have been happening since he started that. And so I look forward to digging into it with him. There's certainly a brotherhood there after I planted a church in Ashland, Oregon, self-supporting, and it's just an amazing labor of love. And so Shannon, welcome to the program. Great to talk to you today.
Thanks, Rob, for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Can you share how'd you become a Christian?
Yeah, becoming a Christian, this goes back a few years. It goes back to 1998. I was in Kansas City and I was finishing up my postgraduate physical therapy schooling. And I was at a point in my life where having a background of going to church and going through all the things of religious kids do, I realized that at some point I need to get right with God. But as I went through my academic life and was searching for happiness and contentment through academics, through other avenues, I really felt emptier and emptier. And so it was at that point in 1998 that I met a disciple and she invited me to church. And luckily enough, I was actually searching for a church but had no idea where to start. And it was in Kansas City that I met our church. It was the Kansas City Church of Christ. And what I so appreciate about that time was they not only helped make the scriptures more clear to me, because I'd been around them, but never had them really put together in a solid, clear format, but they really called me to live what I read. And for me to see these guys that I was studying the Bible with actually doing it as well, especially since we were all young, I was 23 years old, to see young men wanting to literally follow the words of the Bible and do that and say in a humble way, let's do our best to fully commit to Jesus. It was inspiring, challenging, and life-changing. And so it was what I was looking for, even though I didn't realize the depth that this would go. It was life-changing. And it really turned my world upside down. My paradigm of what I thought was going to be my life's goal, instead of being a professional in the world of physical therapy, be the best possible Christian I can be. So that was back in 1998.
Okay, so where'd you go from there?
So being in Kansas City, I worked as a physical therapist around that area for about a year and a half. And then at that point, I moved out to Los Angeles to be part of the church out there. So I went from a church of about give or take 300 to a church of give or take 9 to 10,000. And but of course, the church out there was parceled out into various regions. I was living in Marina Del Rey with some single brothers in the church. And after a few months, I got called to be in the ministry, but I went in as an intern part-time. So I worked half a day doing physical therapy and half a day as an intern in the church working with our singles ministry. And so I was out there at that point where I met my now wife. She was in another group of singles out there. And from there, long story short, we ended up moving to St. Louis, Missouri, and started leading the campus and teen ministry. And we did that all the way through till about 2006. And it was at that point that we got out of the ministry, worked a regular year in our regular professional jobs, and then we moved to El Paso, Texas. And we're part of the church there for roughly 6 years again. And then from that journey, long story short, we moved to the Omaha, Nebraska area, and we're with the church there for about 4 years. And then we moved to where we're at now for the last over 4 years here in Sioux Falls with this church here.
Okay. So how'd you run into your wife, Janella?
Yeah. So funny enough, they had a singles events in the church like we do have. And so of course I go to everything that we can have because I just love it. But it was a karaoke night. So the singles karaoke night, I can't stand karaoke. I don't have a great voice. Karaoke gives me no interest. I was like, hey man, I want to go because I just want to be with my fellow brothers and sisters. Anyway, a sister from the Kansas City church that had moved out there before me was introducing me to people, and she introduced me to Janella that night. And so I immediately had a spark of interest. And so I wanted to get to know her more. And we got to know each other a little bit that evening. And then through a few other events, we got to know each other better. Started out going on a few dates. And then I was able to finally woo her a few months later and to date. And we got engaged actually out there. And then we got married. So within a period of knowing her, engagement, and getting married was just a little over 1 year.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
That's like my situation. I met Pam in June of, I think, 99. No, 89. Sorry. Oh boy. And then we got married in 90. It's just a little over a year. Just boom. When you know it's the right person, it's just the right person. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
It wasn't any doubt in my mind. Like after we went, once I asked her to go steady, I go, okay, I know you don't use the word going steady, but once we started dating steadily, I just knew we're getting married. I was a little older. I was 24 at the time. I'm like, she's the one, no doubt about it. Anyway, you had a cancer scare. Can you tell me about that? What happened?
Yeah. So after we got married, so this would have been in 2000, December of 2000, we got married. And 4 months later, when we were in St. Louis, leading in the church there, the teen and campus ministry, is when I got diagnosed with leukemia, a very rare, fast-acting form of leukemia. And it really kind of hit me broadside because I was very healthy, tried to exercise, do all the right things. I had zero family history of any form of cancer on either my mother or father's side. And so I got diagnosed there in St. Louis. And so I got out of the ministry and basically was just trying to survive my life. I went through heavy chemotherapy, heavy radiation, and it was one of the hardest times of my life, as you can imagine, but also one of the most important. And I say that because I was feeling like I was living like month to month instead of paycheck to paycheck. It was like month to month, not knowing if I could make it one more month, because if I relapsed, who knows if I would make it. So it really called me to connect with the idea of dying and connecting with the idea of, meeting Jesus and going through that process a lot quicker than I would like. And also they showed me just the depth of my wife's love, unconditional love, as she stayed with me through all that. And lastly, it really helped to have some brothers in my life in the church that could come over, as able. We were masking back then as well. That could just really be there and just give me that perspective, that perspective of God being in the middle of this, that I really needed, because those were dark days there for a while.
When I saw you and we saw each other at the Look Up conference in 2019, you are a super fit guy. I mean, you're in great shape, great physical shape. That must have been such a shocker. I mean, just kind of a, how long were you into your marriage at that point?
So we've been married 4 months.
Oh my gosh. Like, did you ever have the thought like, my wife's going to leave me here because I'm so sick?
I never thought that. So, I think her being a disciple, myself being a disciple, we both felt, God's first, then the marriage is second. And I knew that about her going into even getting married. And so I never doubted that at all. I think the only thing that was challenging was the idea that she could possibly lose a husband after only being married for 4 months. That was probably the hardest part for me when it came to our relationship.
So did you have to have like a bone marrow transplant?
No, they actually checked because sometimes that is the algorithm of how they move forward. But because I have such a rare form of my diagnosed form of cancer, they did a world literature search and they kind of got together a few of these specialists and decided we don't have enough information, any research to say do it or don't do it. And because there was a 20% mortality rate if you do it, it's very risky. They said, let's not do it unless you relapse back into cancer again. And I was able to stay in remission and did not ever need that. So wow. I was very fortunate.
Have you had any symptoms since that time or like negative impact of all that chemotherapy and radiation?
Yeah. Minor things. I did get some permanent nerve damage in the nerves that are furthest from the body. So that would be in my hands. I can grip, but I can't pinch with my fingers very well. And so I have some weakness. It's really interesting where that is. And in my feet, I have some permanent nerve damage into my calf muscles and into my feet. So I can no longer run or jump anymore, or I'll get pretty significant pain. So it's been a little challenging because I used to be a runner and a basketball player. So It's really challenged and made me think twice about what can I do to be, healthy and just find those things that work and avoid the things that do not.
If that were me, I'd be like, why, God? Here I am. You're in your early to mid 20s, just married, super healthy, doing everything right, and then all of a sudden you got cancer. How did you reconcile that in your relationship with God? How did you make peace with that?
It goes back to, let me just share one specific time. After I got my cancer, I was able to leave the hospital, but then through my chemotherapy, at one point my white blood cell count got so low they had to re-hospitalize me just for fear of infection and what that could do. And so I was in the hospital for about 2 weeks. They would not let me go home until my white blood cell count would raise up to a certain level. So every morning they would come in, do the blood work, and they would say, no, it's not high enough, got to stay again and stay again and stay again. So it was like day after day. And they would just kind of treat me and deal with my side effects day after day. And it got to a point, honestly, Rob, where I prayed this prayer that, God, I can no longer handle this. Either kill me and let me go home with you now, or get me better so I can go home, because I am now at the point of breaking. And literally that next morning, my white blood cell count came up, and the next day they discharged me back to home. And so what that taught me was how deep my connection with God needs to be, that this life ultimately doesn't matter. If it's time to go, it's time to go. But it really connected me with God on a level that never would have happened had I not experienced that. So when I think of like Paul, when he was writing in Corinthians, that he felt the sentence of death, but that required him to rely on God and not himself, it finally really clicked what that might have been like for me.
How'd you keep from just getting angry and remaining bitter? I mean, I certainly, I'm sure that I would be tempted to go in that direction, just like, hey, this.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I never felt to, curse God or anything like that. What really helped was, I would say, the second day after I got diagnosed, in the church, St. Louis, Kurt Simmons was leading the church, and he came into my hospital room and he said, Shannon, there's 2 things you need to do every day, no matter what. Read your Bible and pray. Just stay close to God. Read your Bible and pray. There were certain days I could maybe read a paragraph, and I'm just so sick, that's all I could read. But I would just read every day. Bible, some friends sent me, it was kind of large print, so I could read it. I read my Bible every day, and I prayed every day. And those things, I think, is what kept me in a centered position with God the most.
Let's switch the subject and go back to your current work. What gave you the idea, hey, I'm going to start a church while working a day job?
Right, yeah. So this goes back to when we were living in El Paso, Texas, my wife and I, Janella. And yeah, I grew up here in South Dakota. And at one point we did have a church here. But what I realized as I was looking is we no longer had a church of our fellowship in South Dakota, in Sioux Falls, even in North Dakota, in this huge region of our world.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, that I probably pulled at me somewhat because I'm from here. So it made me gravitate to that thought more. But my prayer was, God, send somebody else to go there. I'm a, I think I'm a big church guy. I feel comfortable in the bigger churches.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I've grown up. That's where I've done things. I've never thought, something small. So I kept praying this prayer for probably 3 to 4 years at least. Well, you got to be careful when you pray those prayers, because God eventually put on my heart, well, why don't you go? What is keeping you from going? And so God not only told me, hey, maybe you ought to do this, but he put it into my heart to want to do it. Mm-hmm. So the desire came with that as well. And then so I started talking with Janella. She felt good about it as well. And that's where the train started to move forward with that process.
Okay. So it's one thing to think about it and go, oh, that'd be really awesome. Like how'd you cross that bridge to actually doing something about it?
Sure. So I knew that if we were going to do this, we needed to have connections with brothers and sisters in our churches. And that's just how the Bible says to do it. And, it's relationships. And so I basically made a few phone calls. I would talk to, it was Greg Moretsky at the time up in Omaha, and letting him know, hey, what do you think about this idea? We would like to go up there and maybe start something. What's your advice? What's your thoughts? And so he gave me some great advice. I also then started talking with some of the, at some point with the brothers in the Midwest family of churches with Chicago and some of them to say, hey, what do you guys think about this? Because I didn't want to go up there just as a lone ranger, kind of a maverick on my own, right, and not really feel like I'm connected with everybody. I want to do what was maybe in their plans in case something else had already been planned. And so I got advice, and Greg Moretsky at the time said, you know what, I'll completely support you. We'll support you if you guys just want to go up there cold turkey, or if you want to come be a part of the church here a little bit closer, build some relationships here for a couple of years, then move up, you could go ahead and do that. So as much as I wanted to just go cold turkey and do this, I was like, you know what, maybe it's wiser to be closer to the church, get some more relationships established geographically before we do that. And we ended up doing that. And we're a part of the church there for about 4 years. And then in continued talks with churches up in the area we live now. I'm talking about like Minneapolis and Des Moines and Eau Claire, Wisconsin, places like that. We kept getting more advice. And they said, we'll totally understand what you want to do. Well, you have our blessings. We don't have any people right now to support your efforts, like a large mission team or whatever, but we'll support you spiritually and with whatever else we can do. And so he said, well, maybe there's no reason to stop. Let's just go. What are we waiting for at this point? Let's just see what God can do.
It takes a lot of guts. How did you deal with the naysayers, those that urge caution, sure, the people saying, hey, you're going to fall away, you're not going to make it spiritually or whatever. I don't know what they told you, but I just, right, I'm sure that it wasn't like universal, like, yeah, great idea.
Right. Yeah, I think thankfully nobody said you're gonna fall away or anything like that. But at least they didn't say it to my face. But I think more than anything, it was more like, you guys have a daughter. What kind of relationships is she gonna be able to have up there? Not having other kids, and you're not gonna have anybody with you right away. Do you want to wait a couple more years until maybe somebody else wants to go with you? There's always this kind of just keep waiting and waiting and waiting, which I think there's wisdom and patience, but I also think at some point you just got to go, yeah, and just let God bless the way, because there's never, I find, never a perfect time to go anywhere.
Right.
I think Christianity is an uncomfortable religion, and there's never going to be a perfect golden path.
Right.
And so I just feel like at some point, Janelle and I were like, let's go. It's time to go, and let's not worry about all the details we can't control. Let's just see what God does.
Yeah.
We just took that step.
I love that scripture in Ecclesiastes 11 where it says, if you wait for perfect conditions, you'll never get anything done. And right, I think it's so true. I mean, at some point you just had to decide we're just going to go for it. How would you describe the feeling that was urging you on to do it? Like, I've tried to explain to people like why I wanted to plant a church. How would you describe the impulse to go?
Yeah, I think, I'm very fortunate to have been in a lot of our churches and seeing great things happen. And what I learned about myself was it's very comfortable or to just want to kind of fit in the big church and do things there. And don't get me wrong, there's many great ministries we need to keep doing and doing things in these larger churches. But I couldn't take my eyes and mind off these vast areas of our country, although they're less populous, but there's these vast areas where there's still nobody going to. And I was like, well, at some point, we got to get to these spots. And I don't have all the answers of how that's going to work out, but there's souls all over our world in these rural areas. And so having seen our church be growing from, places like the Boston and London and all these great metro areas has been fantastic. But we have to now move to saturate the rest of our world. I look at Jesus going from village to village. It wasn't just metro to metro. And I just appreciate his heart for every place he went, even if it was a small village.
Riding through South Dakota was awesome. And one of the thoughts that kept coming to my mind as I started to San Diego and went through New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, and then I had to go through the motorcycle mecca of South Dakota. That is like the Holy Land for motorcyclists. Sturgis, the big motorcycle rally, and then Wall Drug. I had to stop there. And just crossing, I just go, it's a beautiful area. And Sioux Falls is a beautiful city. And I remember just telling myself I could live here. I was just thinking, maybe God's calling. I literally thought that, this is an amazing place. But I think with COVID and the rise in technology, of course, Zoom and the connection, ease of connection, I know that there are many, many people who are thinking, hey, maybe I should go to New Mexico, or I should go to Teos or, New Mexico, or I should go to someplace, my hometown, and start a church. If a person is thinking that, and I think personally, I think that's the wave of the future. I think what you're doing is absolutely on the cutting edge of God's plan for evangelizing the U.S. and the world. What does a person need to know if they're just kind of bouncing the idea in their mind?
Sure. Well, I think first of all, it's, it needs to be spent time in prayer, just really making sure that, this is something that's on your heart that, you're talking to God about, and just spend some time. Don't make that decision in one night, but at the same time, don't wait 10 years.
Right.
And so I think just have that prayer. You got to be close to God, have a close relationship with God first and foremost. I know that sounds almost like simplistic, but it's so true.
Right.
Secondly, I would say count the cost. Are you willing to step out and do something that might seem very uncomfortable, and it's going to really require you to stretch your faith? Another big thing for me was don't be afraid to fail. Going up there with just my wife and I and our daughter, there were so many times I said, man, this could just fail. But I think realize that we never fail if we do something for God. It's never a failure, because instead of looking at the end results, we have to realize just go. I think so often God just wanted us to go.
Right.
And I think also just make sure you're connected with our church, because there's so many people that want to help you, want to connect with you, want to stay related with you. I had the Upper Midwest brothers for so often to just have that encouragement, that inspiration with as well, and that brother to brother connection. So you're really, like you mentioned, even though we have COVID, we have technology that can keep us connected, even when we're hundreds of miles away from each other.
Right.
And I think also because of COVID, if people haven't yet learned this, we're now learning the ability to fellowship and connect and even have worship through Zoom platforms and Facebook and these other areas. And I think we can use these technologies to now let distance be such a game changer in the wrong way. Right. We have people in our church that literally live over 2 hours away in other rural areas, but we've been able to have Zoom when we need to. We can meet physically when we can. But of course, living up here in South Dakota, we get some inclement weather in the winter with blizzards and things like that. But because of technology, we can still worship and connect and have those times to supplement when we can't get together physically. And
Right.
I think that the COVID has really taught us all over the world how we can start operating like this when we need to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When you look back on the past 4 years, what's some of the most satisfying, what's the most satisfying part of what you've been doing?
Yeah, I think the most satisfying has just been honestly watching God work. We came in, it was just the two of us. On Sunday, I would just preach to my wife and we'd sing songs and just have this faith that God, you're just gonna have to start something here because it's just the two of us. And we had a couple move in from Honduras. We had a couple move from South Carolina. We were able to basically have a little church then with children and adults, and a few other people have moved and different things have happened. And so, as much as we would like to say we figured this out and we got such and such going, it's just been God working. And we're amazed because I never would have written the script so far of where we're at from where we started. And so I think it's just been fun to watch God work because we're like, hey, God, we don't have what we need. You're the one who's going to have to bless
Right.
this effort.
So you started with 2, now you're at 11 adults and 10 kids. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have 11 adult disciples and 1 teen disciple,
Okay.
and then we have 9 children besides that.
Oh my gosh. So you're over 20. You started with 2.
Mhm.
10 times what you started with 4 years ago.
Yeah,
Pretty awesome. That must give you a great sense of pride and satisfaction.
yeah, it's been great, and we're so happy with what we've been able to see God do here. And at the same time, we don't want to rest on our laurels.
Yeah.
We want to see, okay, God, what can we continue to do? How do we take this now to the future?
Right. What's been the most challenging part of it? What's the dirty little secret of what you've done here that people need to know about that has been really tough for you?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. As you mentioned, I do work full time as a physical therapist. That's my full time job. So doing that and trying to help start a church, that can be very challenging because, you give so much of your efforts and energy to your job. And then to have left, I hate to use the word leftover, have left energy, then to pour that into the church and, put together sermons and doing things like that. It just takes time. And I think sometimes time is the biggest factor that I've had to realize, God, you're just going to have to bless the little time I have, and not to compare myself to people who are full-time paid ministry. And I think the other challenge is when you start at just 2 of you or a small group, you can be tempted to feel small, and you can be tempted to look at the big churches and to like think, oh, I wish I had this, or I wish we had this, and to think those thoughts. Or if you don't see immediate results, your church stays small for a while. It can be, the temptation, it can be to be discouraged. Like,
Mhm.
God, when are you going to do the next thing?
Mhm.
What's going on here? Or second guess, should I have moved here?
Yeah, right.
And those thoughts, I think Satan likes to just throw all these doubts. But I think just praying through those things consistently and just being aware, and then just making sure you have relationships outside of, just right here with all our other brothers and sisters, has helped center me during those times.
When we planted the church in Ashland, I remember it was months before we had our first baptism. I think we moved there in August, and we officially started in the following February, and we didn't have a baptism until June. And I'll tell you, we had some big celebrating when that happened. It does take time, but it caused me to just be desperate in my prayer and to ask God to also send people to move in. I remember when people moved in, but I think the desperation, the kind of vulnerable position that God puts you in when you're a church planter, self-supporting, it was so good for me spiritually. It really helped me. I'm sure that, I can connect with what you're saying there. You've got to be patient, don't you?
Yes. Yeah, I think it really refines your motives along the way. Why are you doing this? Because you're not getting the support of being in a big church. You're not getting the support of whatever it may be that you felt in a more comfortable situation. But then realizing, well, then where should my comforts be coming from? I think it just really refines where you're at with God and why you do what you do in the first place.
Right. Well, you've got a happy marriage, you've got a great family, and now you've got a church going. I'm sure that people listening are going, man, how do you keep from getting burned out? How do you, I mean, that you're kind of, you work all week, and then all of a sudden you're working on Sundays too. And then maybe on Saturday you're working, preparing for Sunday. So how do you keep fresh spiritually?
I think that's a week by week thing, probably. Because yeah, you're right. Burnout can be a big thing. There's many times I felt, man, I feel burnt out. I feel challenged. I feel like I just want to take a nap type of thing. And I think that's good for me to recognize those things and verbalize that to God and even to Janella at times. But I think then to pray about that, to go back and get my refreshment from God. And I think besides that, it's keeping a balanced life. I like to not just work, but I like to exercise. I think that helps a lot. Try to get my sleep, try to have good balance with my family, with my wife and daughter, and have those things as well. So just to find a way to keep that balance as best I can. I think lastly for myself is not to put too much pressure on myself for what I feel like I need to do or I need to produce. And say,
Right.
you know what, I'm just gonna leave this in God's hands.
Right.
That, ultimately this is God's church anyway. I'm just a servant here. And I just have prayed many times, God, you're just gonna have to figure this out. This is your church and I'll do what I can, but you obviously know my limitations.
Okay.
So I think things like that has really helped keep me in perspective when that feeling of burnout rears its ugly head.
For those listening in different places around the world, like, where is Sioux Falls, South Dakota? Can you just kind of give, and what is the city like in the area? Can you get just a short description?
Sioux Falls is in the center of the universe. It's here in South Dakota. So if you're obviously from the United States, you know where South Dakota is. If you're not, it's kind of the north central part of the United States. It's in what's the Great Plains. And by plains, I mean it can be very flat, very plain. There's no mountains here. There's no ocean here. There's nothing super amazing other than we have a few rolling hills. So geographically, it's not the most maybe attractive place if you're looking for outside of church things. But the city itself is growing. Every year, it keeps growing and growing. The industries for business are amazing. The medical profession here keeps growing. It's a regional hub for medical things. Yeah, it's a great place. A lot of people, young people are coming here to start businesses. Older people like retiring here. It's a very family-oriented city, I would say. It's also becoming more international as we have more people moving from various countries to live here as well. So we're getting more international, which is great. The city and the surrounding small towns around here, give or take about 260,000 people at this point. But the temperature during the fall, and the spring, and the summer is fantastic. The winters are a little brutal, but that is for what it is in this part of the country. But the city's great. The crime rate's pretty low. There's no state income tax for those of you guys into that. But yeah, we love the city.
Nice. And how old are you, Shannon?
I'm 47.
Okay, 47. You're right in the middle of your prime. You're just peeking out. That's
Thank
awesome.
you.
That's great. Now, what's your plan for the future?
Yeah, so here with the church, well, for me personally, is to continue my profession. At one point, I thought about the idea of, am I an evangelist or what is my role? And so for years, I thought, well, maybe I'm an evangelist. But the more I've thought and prayed, I don't see myself as the typical evangelist role. But I love preaching, I love teaching, I love supplementing things, and I love that role. So our goal in the church here is partly due to the fact that myself and Janelle only have so much time. And as you know, if you're in your church, the more time you can give to various ministries and doing things, the better. We realize our time limitations. And I also realize my 47 years of age. And so our hope is to hire somebody, maybe a single person, most likely of some sort, for either like a 1-year challenge or to become an intern, to come here and just go for it, to just go out there and help evangelize, help meet some of the needs with time that we can't do because of our jobs, and to hopefully even just get some education from an older brother here that can help them out and just move the church forward. I think we have we have a bunch of married couples and everybody's working and busy, but we can have a few young people come. I think that'd be incredible. So I would say to anybody that would be out there, if they're thinking about a place to go, whether it be for a year or to just test the waters, we would love to have somebody come out here and join us in this adventure out here.
That was a turning point in our church planting in Southern Oregon, Ashland, Oregon. I was busy with real estate and trying to keep my head above water financially during the financial crisis, but we saved the money and hired an intern to come down, Chris Schwarzenberger, and boy, he just made such a huge difference, because there I was to kind of anchor the church, but then you had a young guy reaching out on campus and around the town, and the church really started to grow at that point. So you've got the money and you've got the foundation built. So it's a great opportunity for anyone. So I'm certainly, I know we talked about this when I rode through last month in July, but I'm praying and that someone is going to be there by the end of the year. It's such incredible training. So I'll be praying about that. I think you're on the verge of really breaking through there, Shannon.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic. So I would say if anybody is interested or just has questions even, they can just check out our church website. You can either find it on Disciples Today using the church locator, or our website is just www.greatplainschurchofchrist.org, and all of our contact information, my information, is all up on there as well.
Okay, so greatplainschurchofchrist.org. That's where you can be found. Okay. Like, when you look back, and if you had to do this over again, would you?
Yes. 100%.
Do you have any thoughts like, maybe we took maybe we took a left when we should have taken a right? Do you have any thoughts like that?
No, ultimately, I still think we would have come here to do this. Yeah, no doubts about that. Would I've changed maybe a couple things? I don't know. I probably, but nothing I can think of specifically. But I still would have come 100%. Yeah, no doubts with that.
For those who are excited but also fearful, any final words you'd give them?
Yeah, in my thoughts, this is just my opinion, but I think there's a lot of people in our churches that would do great in a situation like this, going on some form of a mission team or going to help a small church like this, or even maybe they want to plant something as well. I think there are some people that this is not for them, right. But I think there's a large amount of people that are out there that this would be great. And I think not to remember what the Bible says, that we live by faith. And faith requires us to do things that maybe we're not comfortable with or we don't feel equipped to do. But I think the beauty of that is you really get to learn what it means to rely on God 100%.
Yeah.
And when I read my Bible, I see what they were doing in the book of Acts and how they were doing things. I'm like, nobody would have gone on a mission team back then with Paul if they did not go on faith.
Right.
Just the way that things were run. It was just, it was all about the faith and letting God move and the Spirit just doing what he did.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the book of Acts, because that inspires me how when the church was scattered in connection with Stephen's persecution, that was really the impetus for the growth of the kingdom. It was all those people, you don't know their names, and yet they'd go back to the countries that they came to when they came to celebrate Pentecost. They went back and started churches just like you're doing. And I really believe deeply that is where we're at in the movement, that's the future of, if we're going to continue to call ourselves a movement and actually move, we've got to move in the direction of the small church, exactly what you're doing. And in fact, there's a guy in my church right now, great couple, been disciples a long time, and they work full-time jobs, but they're getting transferred to Idaho Falls, Idaho. And it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere, but beautiful area. And I'm just pumped for him, because I go, okay, this is his chance. He's got the experience. There's so many disciples that have, like you, have had intern experience or Bible Talk leadership experience. They've forgotten more than most people ever know. And yet it's lying fallow. It's not being used in a larger situation. And I go, man, if we could just turn that energy loose, and we could win the world. Absolutely. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think 100%. People go to Idaho Falls or whatever area you're thinking of going, that, there's so many reasons why you should go.
Yeah.
And there's so few that you shouldn't. And I think there's people in your church that know you and can help you if there's something that really you need to work on. But I think the majority of people, we're ready. God's ready. He wants to use us. And it's never going to be a perfect transition.
Yeah.
You're going to mess up. You're going to have errors. But who doesn't? But I think as long as we're relying on God and working together, we're an international family.
Yeah.
We're a church worldwide, and you will always have the support of your brothers and sisters, whether they're down the block or they're down the state.
Yeah.
That we can have that connection with each other. And I think living in a world that's so already connected with travel and all these things, it makes it so much easier with the internet that we can connect, that you're not really going away
Right.
as far as you thought you were.
Exactly.
I'm inspired by Paul and those guys. They had no internet. They had no airplanes. It was much rougher to get around. And yet if they could do it, how much more can we do in our modern advanced world?
I totally agree. What advice would you give for the person who wants to make this life count?
My advice to make this life count is, just at the end of the day, you want to be able to tell God, I gave you my best.
Yeah.
You're not worried about where the chips fell at the end of the day. You just gave God your best. I look at somebody like you mentioned, Stephen. Stephen gave his best and his life was short and he died. Then you have somebody else who lived a long life and their life counted as well. But people just gave their best. I think at the end of the day, we don't have to worry about, get too swept up in the details.
Right.
Too swept up in, how big our church is or what kind of ministries you're going to have.
Right.
We just get swept up. I just want to make sure I'm doing my best for God, giving my best. And for some of us, that means we need to go to these places. We need to be willing to go on an adventure. And I would say, don't be afraid if it doesn't work out.
Right.
Who says you're supposed to go only if it's 100% proven that you're going to be victorious? I mean, how many times was Paul unvictorious in a physical sense, was kicked out of town or stoned or whatever happened?
Right.
But he just kept moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when we planted that church, I just went with me and my wife and my kids because I thought, if I fail, I don't want to be responsible for anybody else. I mean, looking back, I wish I had brought more people, but at the same time, where I was at then, I was like, this could fail. That's definitely a possibility. I may have to just pack it up and move back to a larger church. But I agree with you. I go, who cares if you fail? You tried, you did your best, and just that's no way to live in a fear of failure.
Yeah, I mean, you could say Jesus failed and he went back to Nazareth.
Right.
Because the faith of the people was not there. But I would never say, hey, Jesus, you failed. Go up there. He kept moving.
Exactly.
And he kept doing what he needed to do. And I think going someplace, even if it doesn't work out and you end up going back to your home church, that is a major victory for God because he sees what you're doing.
I agree. We met at the 2019 Look Up Small Church Leadership Conference. We've got part 2 of that coming up in Dallas in December 2nd through 5th of this year. Can you just share what you got out of that conference? I know this is a shameless plug for this conference, but I'm going to go ahead and hit that button. What'd you get out of it? And are you planning on going to the conference this December?
Sure. I think going to Eau Claire for the small church conference was fantastic on many levels. I think the main level was seeing other people that were trying to do the exact same thing as yourself. Well, maybe not perfectly exactly, but they understood what it means to be in a small church, all the victories that come with it, all the challenges that come with that.
Right.
And just to have that fellowship that's much more specific than in the larger sense of our church was just incredible. Just to hear people like yourself, Rob, and different people share their own personal examples of what happened when they did that. It just really builds your faith and your encouragement that, you are not alone if you want to do something like this. And I think that was just really inspiring. I left there just feeling like, this is good. Yeah, I'm definitely not alone. And there's a lot of people that have come before me and a lot of people that want to do this as well. I think it also helps you to build relationships with people that are currently doing the same thing. And as for going to Dallas, I want to I want to go 100%. The only thing that will keep me is if I don't get enough vacation time.
That's great.
If I have the vacation time, I'm going there for sure because it was so important to me going there last time.
Yeah.
So I think what Rob is organizing here, if you're listening to this and you can go or you're not sure, then go. Please go.
Yeah. It surprised me because I knew that the classes were going to be good, but I think the greater power was the encouragement for those who attended, just feeling like, hey, I'm in a place where people get me. They understand the unique challenges of small church leadership or small ministry leadership, even if they're in a larger church, and just making friends who are in a similar spot. It's rare, especially in a small ministry. As you know, you're not around other people. You're separated in your situation by hundreds of miles. And so being in that 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours of an encouragement bubble, it's massive. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to be praying that you can get to Dallas, and I look forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Rob. Super appreciate it.
And I want to just, again, please ask you to come to the 2021 Climb Conference. If you're leading in a small church or a small ministry or a small group, or you want to do missionary work in the future, or you're thinking, hey, I'd like to be a missionary, maybe I want to go to Sioux Falls, you don't want to miss this event. And this is how you're going to benefit directly. First of all, inspirational speakers. We've got Mufid Tomei planning on coming out from Lebanon, and they're doing amazing work there. We've got different people who are going to be speaking, doing classes, practical instruction. Each day has a theme to help you and your ministry grow. Every class is going to give you tools to revive your spirit and grow your ministry. So the materials are specifically focused to help you and your ministry both. And then, for example, the Friday program is dedicated to helping you to revive, to refresh, and restore the joy of your salvation. And so Joel Pete is customizing a program to make 2022 your best year ever spiritually. And then not only personal growth, but ministry growth and planning. The Saturday program will help you to come up with a complete plan, program, and curriculum for your ministry in 2022. So you'll leave the conference with confidence that you have in your hands the material and the support you need to make 2022 your ministry's best year so far. And then just finally, like what I shared earlier, massive encouragement. You'll spend 3 days together with disciples who are climbing the same mountain you are. You'll make friends, you'll laugh, and you're going to learn every single day. So again, that's December 2nd through 5th in Dallas, Texas. It'll be at the Marriott, $109 a night. Please sign up. It's $150 per person. It's well worth it. And you can go to robskinner.com and look for the Climb Conference tab, and please register today. If you're enjoying this podcast, please hit the subscribe button. Let your friends know about it and how to find it, because my goal is to inspire you to live a no-regrets life, to make this life count, and to multiply disciples, leaders, and churches. Have a great day, and make this life count.